My best friend set me up with the guy of my dreams and then stole him from me. Maya and I had been best friends since third grade. The kind of friendship where you don't knock before walking into each other's houses, and every major moment, good or bad, has the other person standing right beside you. When we got into the same state university, it felt like a dream. We moved into a tiny dorm room with bunk beds and a wall covered in photos from our childhood. Everything felt familiar, safe, and solid, just like it always had. AT first. College was exactly what I hoped it would be. Maya and I had our routines: late-night fries at the diner across campus, study sessions that turned into YouTube rabbit holes, and weekly calls home on speakerphone. But college also had this way of pulling people into new worlds, and Maya stumbled into hers one random Friday afternoon. We'd been walking back from class when we passed the main quad, where the university football team was hosting some kind of campus meet and greet. There were tables with merch, players signing posters, and music blasting from a portable speaker. "Let's go check it out," Maya said, already veering off the sidewalk. I hesitated. Sports had never been my thing, and honestly, the crowd felt intimidating. But Maya was already weaving her way through the tables, and I wasn't about to be left standing there alone. Maya had this way of talking to people, like she'd known them forever. Within 10 minutes, she was laughing with a couple of players while I hovered nearby, trying not to look as out of place as I felt. One of the guys, a tall linebacker named Jake, grinned at me. "You don't talk much, do you?" Before I could respond, Maya swooped in. "Oh, she's just shy. But she's great once you get to know her." I cringed a little, but Jake just laughed and offered me a soda from the cooler. By the time we walked away, Maya had somehow gotten herself invited to one of their house parties the following weekend. "They're actually really nice," she said as we crossed the quad. "You'll come with me, right?" I hesitated. Parties weren't my scene, and I could already picture myself stuck in a corner, nursing a drink and counting down the minutes until I could leave. "Please," Maya pressed, giving me her best puppy dog eyes. "It'll be fun, and you won't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to. Just come with me." Reluctantly, I agreed. Looking back, I wonder how different things might have been if I'd said no. The night of the party, Maya was practically bouncing around our dorm room while I sat on my bed, half-heartedly dabbing concealer on a stubborn zit. "You're wearing that?" she asked, side-eyeing my oversized sweater. "It's comfortable," I said, already feeling defensive. "Comfortable isn't the vibe tonight, babe." I sighed and let her shove me into a crop top she picked out. She even did my eyeliner, which felt like an act of war because she kept saying, "Stop blinking," or "I swear to God." By the time we walked up to the football house, music was thumping so loud I could feel it in my chest. The house was packed, people spilling out onto the porch, red Solo cups everywhere, and someone had already broken something because I could hear glass crunching under my shoes. Maya grabbed my wrist and pulled me inside like she was leading a lost child through a department store. The thing about Maya is, she's good at this kind of thing. She can walk into a room of strangers and act like she's known everyone for years. Within minutes, she was talking to Jake, the linebacker from the quad. He recognized me, gave me a grin, and handed me a drink that was suspiciously blue. "Chris is around here somewhere," Jake said casually, and Maya's eyes flickered over to me. I just shrugged. Chris wasn't exactly on my mind. I was too busy trying not to look like an awkward little shadow behind Maya. But then, like some kind of teen movie cliché, Chris walked in. He was mid-laugh about something, his head thrown back slightly. And he had that easy way of moving through a room that made it look like he belonged everywhere. He caught Jake's eye, and before I could even process it, he was walking toward us. "Hey, Jake," he said, then turned to me. "And, hi." I swear my soul briefly left my body. "Hi, I'm Sarah." Jake jumped in. "This is Maya's best friend. You two should talk." Which, honestly, is probably one of the worst segues in history, but Chris just smiled. The thing about him wasn't just that he was good-looking, he was nice. Like, he actually asked me questions and seemed to care about my answers. We talked about school, about our terrible dining hall food, about how neither of us understood people who genuinely enjoyed calculus. Maya eventually drifted away to talk to someone else, leaving Chris and me in our own little bubble. At one point, he glanced over where Maya was, surrounded by people. "Your friends, intense." I laughed, a real laugh, not one of those polite ones you do when someone isn't actually funny. "Yeah, she's a lot. But in a good way, mostly." We stayed like that, talking, laughing, making dumb jokes, until Maya reappeared, holding a fresh drink and wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We should head out soon," she said, her voice light but firm. Chris gave me a quick smile. "See you around, Sarah." On the walk back to our dorm, Maya was quiet at first. Then she said, "You two hit it off." "Yeah, I guess we did." She nodded, but something about her expression made me feel off. Like I'd done something wrong without realizing it. Looking back, I think that was the moment things started to shift. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. Chris and I began texting, nothing crazy, just casual stuff. Memes, jokes about our professors, him asking if I'd be at the next football game. Maya noticed, At first, she seemed excited. Every time my phone buzzed, she'd glance over and smirk. "Is that Chris again? Sarah, you've got a quarterback in your pocket." But as the texts turned into longer conversations and Chris started waving at me across campus or showing up outside my lecture hall to walk me back to the dorms, Maya's enthusiasm started to fade. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just little things, jokes that felt a little sharper than before. One night, while we were studying in our dorm, Maya looked up from her laptop. "So, are you guys, dating now, or?" I hesitated. "I don't know. We're just talking, I guess." "Nothing serious." She let out this small laugh, shaking her head. "I just didn't think you'd go for someone like you." It was said so casually, like it wasn't supposed to sting. But it did. The next day, Chris asked me to grab coffee after his practice. I was nervous, actual butterflies in my stomach nervous, but the moment I saw him standing outside the cafe, all easy smiles and messy hair, I felt my shoulders relax. We sat by the window and talked for hours. He told me about his family, about how football wasn't always his plan, about how he sometimes felt like he was playing a character everyone expected him to be. At one point, I asked, "So, why me? Why are you spending your free time with me?" He looked genuinely confused by the question. "Why not you? You're smart, you're funny," and he stopped, running a hand through his hair. "You're real, Sarah. I like being around you." I think my brain short-circuited. When I got back to the dorm that evening, Maya was already there, sprawled on her bed and scrolling through her phone. "Where were you?" she asked without looking up. "Just out with Chris." She glanced up then, her eyebrows raised. "Wow, look at you. Coffee dates with the campus golden boy." Her smile was sharp, and the way she said it didn't feel like a compliment. That weekend, Chris invited me to another party at the football house. I was hesitant, but he promised he'd stick with me this time. Maya, of course, was coming too. When we walked in, the energy felt different. Maya immediately disappeared into the crowd while Chris found me and handed me a soda. "You doing okay?" he asked, leaning in so I could hear him over the music. I nodded, even though I felt out of place. But then Maya reappeared, slipping an arm around Chris's shoulders with a familiarity that made my stomach tighten. "There you are," she said loudly, her smile a little too wide. "Sarah, you don't mind if I steal him for a dance, do you?" Chris looked uncomfortable, but before he could respond, she was already pulling him toward the center of the room. I stood there, clutching my drink, feeling like an idiot. They danced for what felt like forever. Maya was laughing, twirling, leaning into him in a way that made my chest ache. Chris didn't seem like he was having fun, but he didn't exactly push her away either. Eventually, he caught my eye across the room and broke away from her, walking straight back to me. "Hey, sorry about that," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's fine," I said, trying to sound casual, but it wasn't fine. And I think Chris knew it too. Later that night, Maya and I walked back to our dorm in silence. She didn't say anything about Chris, and I didn't ask, but something had shifted. I could feel it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Maya had just drawn a line in the sand. The weeks after that party felt off. Like walking on thin ice, knowing it could crack at any second. Chris and I were still talking, still meeting up between classes or grabbing coffee after his practices. But every time I mentioned him around Maya, the air seemed to tighten. She'd make these casual comments, always with a laugh or a smirk to soften the blow. Careful, Sarah. Guys like Chris don't usually stick around for long. Must be nice to have the quarterback wrapped around your finger. Don't get too comfortable. You know how these things usually end. I'd smile or brush it off, but the word stuck. One Friday night, Chris invited me to grab dinner off campus. It felt like a date, not one of our usual coffee meetups or quick chats between classes. An actual date. When I told Maya, she was sitting cross-legged on her bed, painting her nails. She paused mid-stroke, her eyes flicking up to me. Oh. Dinner? Like, a date dinner. I think so, I said, trying not to sound too giddy. She gave me a small smile, but her voice was sharp. Wow, Sarah. Moving up in the world, huh? I froze for a second, unsure how to respond. But before I could say anything, she turned her attention back to her nails, and the moment passed. Dinner with Chris was perfect. We went to this hole-in-the-wall taco place, sat in a booth with peeling vinyl seats, and stayed there for hours. He told me stories from his childhood. I told him about how Maya and I used to sneak into her neighbor's pool every summer, and somewhere in the middle of it, he reached across the table and held my hand. When he walked me back to campus, he hesitated outside my dorm building. I had a really good time tonight, he said softly. Me too. And then, he kissed me. It wasn't some over-the-top, dramatic movie kiss. It was soft, sweet, and it made my knees feel like jellied. I floated back to my dorm room, grinning like an idiot. But when I walked in, Maya was sitting at her desk, scrolling through her phone. You're back late, she said without turning around. Yeah, we went to dinner. She finally looked at me, her eyes scanning my face. I could feel the smile fading from mine as she stared. So, you're really doing this, huh? She said. What do you mean? This. You and Chris. You know, Sarah, not everyone is built for that kind of attention. Not everyone can keep up. There was this sharp edge to her voice, like she was daring me to challenge her, but I didn't. I just stood there, feeling small and stupid. From that night on, Maya started spending more time with the football guys again. But not with me. She'd go out to their parties without inviting me, come back late smelling like cheap cologne and tequila, and then act like everything was perfectly normal the next morning. One night, Chris texted me, "Are you coming to the party tonight? Maya said you might not be feeling well." I frowned at my phone. I hadn't said anything like that to her. I'm fine. I'll be there. When I arrived at the football house, it felt like everyone already knew something I didn't. Maya was in the kitchen, perched on the counter with a drink in her hand, surrounded by a group of guys. Chris was on the other side of the room, looking uncomfortable. When he saw me, he made his way over. "Hey, I wasn't sure you were coming," he said, his brows furrowed. "Maya told you I wasn't feeling well," I said flatly. He hesitated. "Yeah, she did." We both turned to look at her. She was laughing at something one of the guys said, her head thrown back, her arm resting on Jake's shoulder like she owned the room. I felt something tighten in my chest. Chris sighed. "Sarah, But before he could finish, Maya's voice cut through the crowd. "Hey, Sarah. Come over here." Every head turned toward me, and suddenly it felt like the whole party was watching. I forced a smile and walked over. "You made it," she said, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "Chris was so worried about you." The way she said it, loud enough for everyone to hear, made me want to crawl out of my skin. I felt Chris come up behind me, his hand hovering near my shoulder, but Maya was already turning her attention back to the guys around her, dismissing me like I was nothing. I wanted to leave. But more than anything, I wanted to know why. Why was she doing this? Why did it feel like my best friend suddenly hated me? And why couldn't I shake the feeling that this was only going to get worse? Things between Maya and me felt like a slow-moving car crash, happening in plain sight, but impossible to stop. Chris and I kept talking, and we were spending more time together. Grabbing coffee after his practice turned into studying together in the library, which turned into late-night walks back to the dorms. It wasn't anything official, but it felt real, and Maya noticed. At first, it was subtle. She'd throw out comments like, "Wow, Sarah, you're spending a lot of time with him. Don't you think you're getting a little ahead of yourself?" Or she'd glance at her phone during our movie nights and say something like, "Chris just texted me. He said he hasn't heard from you today. You should probably check in." The thing is, Chris and I were talking every day. So why was he texting Maya about me? One night, Chris asked if I wanted to come to another party at the football house. Maya was going too, of course, but this time I didn't let that stop me. When I got there, the house was packed as usual. People were crowded in every corner, and someone was already trying to fix a broken chair with duct tape. I spotted Chris pretty quickly. He was leaning against the wall, chatting with Jake, but his face lit up when he saw me. "Hey, you made it," he said, smiling as he leaned in to be heard over the music. "I told you I'd come," I said, grinning back. But before we could say anything else, Maya materialized out of nowhere. She draped herself casually over Chris's arm and gave me a sharp smile. "Sarah, you're here," she said, her voice just a little too bright. Chris shifted uncomfortably, gently pulling his arm away from her grip. Hey, Maya." She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she didn't care. "Sarah, have you tried the punch yet?" she asked sweetly. "It's so good." I forced a smile and shook my head. "I'm good, thanks." The three of us stood there in awkward silence until Jake called Chris over to help with something. He gave me a quick apologetic look before disappearing into the crowd, and then it was just me and Maya. She tilted her head, studying me. "You know, Sarah, Chris is really nice. Almost too nice, you know? Sometimes I think he's just being polite." I froze. What's that supposed to mean? She shrugged, her smile sharp. "I'm just saying, guys like him? They don't stick around for girls like you." It was like someone had punched me in the stomach. I walked away before she could say anything else. I didn't want her to see how much it hurt. I found Chris in the kitchen a little while later, pouring himself a drink. He smiled when he saw me, but his smile quickly faded when he noticed my face. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. I hesitated. Should I tell him? Should I just let it go? But before I could answer, Maya walked into the kitchen. "There you are," she said, her voice loud and cutting through the noise. "Chris, I need your help with something upstairs. Jake said you'd know where the extra speakers are." Chris glanced between us, clearly torn. Sure, I'll be right there." But Maya was already walking away, leaving him no choice but to follow. I stayed in the kitchen for a few minutes, staring at the half-empty cups scattered across the counter. I couldn't shake the feeling that Maya wasn't just trying to ruin my night, she was trying to ruin everything. When Chris came back downstairs, he looked off, like something had happened. "Sarah," he said, finding me near the back porch. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms, bracing myself. "What did she say to you?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She told me that you've been feeling overwhelmed. That maybe I should give you some space. Is that true?" I felt my stomach drop. "No, it's not true." His brows knit together. "I thought so. It didn't sound like you." I could feel the tears building in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Chris, she's trying to push us apart." He stared at me for a moment, like he was putting the pieces together. And then he nodded. "Come on," he said softly, taking my hand. "Let's get out of here." We left the party without saying goodbye to anyone, not even Maya. Chris walked me back to my dorm, his hand in mine the whole time. When we reached the building, he hesitated. "Sarah, I like you a lot, but I don't want to get in the middle of whatever's going on between you and Maya." I swallowed hard. "I don't think there's anything left to fix." He nodded slowly. "Okay." And then he kissed my forehead, squeezed my hand, and walked away. When I opened the door to my dorm room, Maya was sitting on her bed, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't just tried to blow up my entire life. She glanced up at me and smiled. "Oh, you're back early. Did something happen?" I didn't answer her. I couldn't. I just grabbed my pajamas, went to the communal bathroom, and locked myself in a stall. For the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly alone. The silence in our dorm room was suffocating. Maya was still acting like everything was fine, playing music while she got ready, laughing loudly on her phone, and scrolling TikTok in bed every night like we were still the same inseparable best friends. But we weren't. Chris and I weren't talking anymore. Not really. The occasional awkward wave on campus, a faint smile in passing, but that was it. It was like the thread connecting us had been cut, and Maya was holding the scissors. One Friday afternoon, Maya was getting ready to go out again. Her outfit was perfect, her makeup flawless, and she was humming along to some pop song on her speaker. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Football house," she said without looking up from her phone, "with Chris." She finally glanced at me in the mirror, her smile sharp. "Why do you care, Sarah?" "You know why," she sighed, turning to face me with her arms crossed. "Look, Sarah, Chris isn't your boyfriend. He was never your boyfriend. He's just nice. Too nice to tell you the truth." I felt something crack inside me. What truth? That he's out of your league. That you were just a phase, a distraction. God, Sarah, you're so needy. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. "You've been lying to him. And to me." "For weeks," I said, my voice trembling. "Oh my God, stop being so dramatic." She rolled her eyes, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "You honestly think Chris was ever going to stick around for you? Guys like him don't go for girls like you. They just don't." The world went silent. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. I just stared at her, realizing in real time that the person I'd called my best friend for over a decade wasn't someone I recognized anymore. "You're jealous," I said quietly. "This isn't about Chris. This is about you. You can't stand that for once someone noticed me instead of you." Maya's smile vanished. Her face went blank, and for a second, I thought she might yell. But she didn't. She just grabbed her purse, threw one last glance at me over her shoulder, and walked out the door. The door slammed shut behind her, and the silence in the room felt deafening. I sat down on my bed, my hands shaking, my throat tight. For so long, Maya had been my anchor, my safe space. But now, I felt like I was floating in open water, with nothing to hold on to. A few hours later, I got a text from Chris. "Are you okay? Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Finally, I replied, "Yeah. Where are you?" "The quad. I'll wait for you." When I got there, Chris was sitting on one of the benches under a flickering streetlight, his hands shoved into the pocket of his hoodie. He stood up when he saw me, his face etched with something I couldn't quite read. "Regret, maybe." "I talked to Maya," he said softly. My stomach dropped. What did she say?" "She told me you've been overwhelmed. That you're not handling things well. That you're jealous of her." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "Do you believe her?" "No. But, Sarah, I'm tired. I'm tired of being caught between the two of you. And I don't know how to fix this." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I never wanted this to happen, Chris. I know. And I'm sorry for letting it get this far." We stood there in silence for a long time, the cold night air settling heavily around us. Finally, he sighed. I think we need to take a step back. From everything. At least for now." I nodded, even though it felt like my chest was caving in. "Okay." He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, but instead, he just gave me a small, sad smile and turned to walk away. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the empty bench where he'd been sitting, feeling like something important had just slipped through my fingers. When I finally made my way back to the dorm, Maya was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. Her face was turned away from me, her phone still glowing faintly on her pillow. I climbed into bed without a word, staring up at the ceiling in the dark. For the first time since third grade, I felt like I didn't have a best friend anymore. Living with Maya had become unbearable. Our dorm felt like a war zone, silent, tense, and heavy with everything unsaid. She still went out every weekend, still came back smelling like beer and someone else's cologne, still pretended like she hadn't torched our friendship and walked away holding the lighter. I kept telling myself I'd move on, that I'd stop caring. But every time I passed her empty bed on a Friday night or caught a glimpse of her laughing with Jake and Chris across the quad, the questions circled back. Why? What did I do that was so unforgivable? One Friday evening, as she was getting ready to go out again, I finally broke. "Are you meeting Chris tonight?" I asked. She paused, halfway through applying her lipstick. "Why do you care?" Her tone was sharp, dismissive, like I was being ridiculous for even asking. I shook my head. "You know what? Forget it." But I couldn't forget it. That night, I went to the football house. Alone, IT was packed as usual, music pounding, lights too bright, air thick with sweat and alcohol. I pushed my way through the crowd until I found her. Maya. Standing by the kitchen counter with Chris, she was leaning against him, one hand on his arm, laughing at something he'd said, or maybe something she'd said to herself. Chris wasn't laughing. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me, and in that moment, something in me snapped. I walked straight up to them. Maya turned and gave me a tight smile, the kind you give someone when you're pretending not to hate them. "Sarah," she said, overly cheerful. "Didn't expect to see you here." Chris took a step back, away from her, and looked at me. His face was tired, like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. I didn't look at him. I looked straight at her. "Why, Maya?" I asked. The smile faded from her face. "What are you talking about? Why did you do it? Why did you lie to him about me? Why did you go out of your way to ruin everything?" She glanced around, realizing people were starting to stare. "Sarah, maybe now isn't the time." "No," I said firmly. "Now is the time. You've been tearing me down for weeks, and I need to know why. What did I do to deserve this?" For a split second, I thought she might tell me. I thought she might actually say it. But instead, she turned to Chris, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Chris, you don't have to stand here for this." But Chris didn't move. He stayed rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on her. "Maya," he said quietly, "what did you do?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. And in that silence, everything became crystal clear. Chris looked back at me, his face tight with realization. "I'm sorry, Sarah." Maya's expression twisted into anger, embarrassment, something I couldn't quite place. "Whatever," she said, her voice sharp. "You two deserve each other." She stormed off, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Chris and me standing there in the middle of the chaos. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "I should go," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, wait," Chris said. But I was already walking away. I left the party, stepping out into the cold night air, and started the long walk back to my dorm. My ears were still ringing from the music, but all I could hear was Maya's voice echoing in my head. "Guys like him don't go for girls like you." I realized then that the friendship I'd spent over a decade building wasn't salvageable. And Chris? Whatever connection we had was tangled in too many lies and too much hurt to be unraveled. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone, but strangely, I also felt free. The day Maya moved out of our dorm, I stayed in the library until sunset. I didn't want to be there to watch her pack her things, didn't want to hear her heels clicking against the floor as she walked out one final time. When I came back, the room felt emptier. Her side was stripped bare, the string lights taken down, the posters gone, the bed neatly made for whoever would take her place. There was an envelope on my desk with my name written in her handwriting. "Sarah, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, and I'm not sure I deserve it. I was jealous of you, of Chris, of how easy you made everything look. I thought if I could ruin things for you, it would make me feel better. It didn't. I'm sorry." I sat down on my bed and read the note again and again until the words stopped meaning anything. I wanted to feel something: closure, relief, anger, but mostly, I just felt tired. I tucked the note into the back of a drawer and left it there. Chris and I never really found our way back to what we had before. We'd smile when we passed each other on campus, exchange polite hellos, but that was it. And honestly, that was okay. He was a good person who got caught in something messy, something he didn't deserve. I spent the rest of the semester focusing on myself, my classes, my assignments, and reconnecting with the parts of college I'd been ignoring while caught up in everything with Maya and Chris. It's strange how quickly routines fill the empty spaces people leave behind. Maya and I had been inseparable for so long that I thought losing her would break me. And in some ways, it did. But eventually, I realized that some friendships aren't meant to last forever. They fracture, they fall apart, and sometimes the pieces are too sharp to pick up without getting hurt all over again. I think Maya knew that too. Maybe that's why she left the note, but in the end, her apology didn't fix anything. It didn't glue us back together or make me forget what she'd done. It was just words on paper. Still, I'm glad she wrote it, because now, when I think about her, it's not with anger. It's just acceptance. Losing your best friend isn't something you bounce back from overnight. But you do bounce back. You wake up, you keep going, and one day you realize the hurt isn't so sharp anymore, and that's enough.
What would you do in a similar situation? Share your opinion in the comments.